Welcome everybody to World History. As you can see, I have a little bit of a scene transition, a little bit of a different setup, but we're still going to be moving on and learning about world history. We were learning about something brand new this week for the next couple weeks, and it's going to be the Age of Discovery. So this is where we get into the era of world history where we have people like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, all these famous sailors who go and discover the new world. Of course, there's already millions of people living in the Americas at the time, but we're talking about European discovery. And this is really going to set off a chain reaction to have European kind of global dominance in the years, the hundreds of years to follow. So we're going to talk about why all of these things actually begin, why things like European control over many colonies in the world began, and why things like the slave trade began. But we have to go back to the origins and discover why all this happened in the first place. The big reason why a lot of this stuff happened was just because of competition. We're going to be talking about the competition between European nations. Remember going back to what we learned about Chinese history with Zhang He and the fact that China had such a big lead technologically, but they ended up not exploring the world in the way that the Europeans did. We're going to talk about why the Europeans specifically did all these things. So we're going to be talking about reasons for the Age of Discovery, which of course isn't the most accurate term, but it's kind of the term that we use. I also use the term Age of Exploration because that works as well. So we're going to go over causes and effects. Why did the Europeans explore the world? So we're going to be talking about many of the different causes and many of the different technological advancements that happened, starting with mapmaking. So there is a big increase in terms of accuracy of maps that existed in Europe at this time. And what did that do? Remember, we just ended our talk on the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. All of those scientific and cultural advances are going to inform what's about to happen in history here. We're around the late 1400s, early 1500s. So what was the effect of better map making? It increased accuracy of our maps and added info about Africa and Asia. And it also, we had a recognition that you could sail west and go to Asia. This is very important. We didn't, of course, know about the North and South American continents at the time, but we understood that the world was round. People didn't think that the world was flat. At this time, people basically understood that the world was round. They just thought the Earth was much smaller than it actually was. But there is this recognition that, hey, maybe there's this secret route where if we go west instead of east, we can actually reach Asia without having to go all the way around Africa. Another cause, navigational instruments like the compass and the astrolabe. Basically, these things made it so that ships could sail out of sight of land without losing their bearings. Most ships before this time always had to have somebody be able to see the land, or else they would get lost. They would mostly hug the coast. But now with these new inventions, you can actually sail past the point where you don't see land, and you can still know where you are. They also applied things like astronomy and geometry to navigation and allowed sailors to determine the relative heights of stars and planets, and they could calculate latitude based on that. So basically, just knowing where the stars were in the sky, knowledge of astronomy actually really helped navigation, because when you're out on the ocean late at night, you can see the stars very clearly, and by knowing where the stars are in the sky, you can actually know where you are on the ocean without seeing any land. Number 3, changes in ship design. Reductions in the width of ships, smaller and different shaped sails, and moving the location of the rudder allowed them to sail against the wind, travel quickly, and be steered accurately. The rudder of a ship, believe it or not, used to mostly be on the side of a ship. They moved it to the very back, and that made it much better in terms of being able to steer it. And also some ships at the time still employed people who would row, but in general now we can figure out better ways of having sails, which means that you're using wind power and can go much faster than actually people having to, having hundreds of guys in the bottom of the boat rowing it, which is the way it used to go. Alright, now we also have cannons and guns. This allowed the people who were using these kinds of cannons and guns, remember these are the very early types like flintlock pistols and rifles and the cannons where you just have, you load up a cannonball, you have gunpowder in there, you light it up, and it's not very accurate, but if you point it in the general direction of what you're aiming at, you can do some serious damage. And the effects of that is that they could defeat larger navies. If you're the ancient way of warfare when it came to naval battles is that you would have those boats like I was talking about with people rowing, and you would basically ram into another ship and people would have to jump from one boat to the other and board it like that. With the advent of cannons and guns, you no longer had to do that. You could just sail past them, unleash all your cannons, and you could actually fight larger navies than you. So once the Europeans had this technology, it meant that they could sail into places like Asia without having to worry so much about being boarded. All right, now we have another important invention, standardized money, such as the florin, from Florence, of course, and the ducat, which was from Venice. So what is the importance of having standardized money? It made economic transactions much more reliable. Banks could now loan money to governments and major trading companies. The fact that you could have loans and that you could, when you brought treasure back maybe from some far-off expedition, that you knew that your gold would be worth a certain value of florins or ducats when you got back. Was very, very important. So having this kind of standardized money system was very important to having people want to go explore because they knew they could be rewarded for it in money that they could spend in many different places. All right, the joint stock company, that was a new invention as well. So basically a company where people can buy stocks in it, and many different people all own a little piece of the company. So if the company gains profit, then you, with your piece of stock, you also gain profit from that. And these didn't really exist until the late 1400s. What was the effect of this? You could raise a lot of money and you could finance these voyages, especially the ones that were risky, high risk, high reward, much like how the stock market works today. Kind of this is the ancient kind of stock market where you could, you could put in you could bet big that the ship that was going to go sail would bring a lot of treasure back, and if it did, well then you got paid handsomely for it. But if the ship sank for whatever reason, you could lose a lot of money. So this was kind of the stock market of its day. And then finally, the last cause that we're going to talk about that kind of led to the Age of Exploration was this idea called mercantilism. And that's the economic theory that the world has a fixed amount of wealth. Today, we don't really think this anymore. We think that just kind of with resources, there can be almost unlimited wealth. Economics just kind of exists in our head. But however, back in this time, there's kind of idea that there's a fixed amount of wealth. So basically, if you took money from another country, you were better off and they were worse off. So you would try to grab as much money as possible. So countries sought overseas possessions to increase their wealth. So if we create a colony, maybe in Brazil, maybe in what's now Mexico, maybe in East Africa, if we create these kinds of wealth generators, these colonies that can, whether from like extraction or plantations or something like that, we can make money and that will make us more powerful as opposed to our competition. Countries like France, England, Spain, Portugal. A lot of these countries were always kind of fighting with each other for economic dominance. So all that competition led them to go try to create their own colonies all across the world. So it's basically, if I gain something, you lose something, and I'm better off. As opposed to kind of how the economy works today, where we kind of realize, well, if I help you out, you help me out, we're all better off. But this was a much more cutthroat time, where it's like, I'm going to try to steal from you, so then I'm better off and you're worse off. So an important idea during this time, this is our last slide today, is the idea of a balance of trade. You want more exports than imports. You want more things going out of your country and people paying for them rather than bringing things in and having to pay them. So you want more exports than imports. So this was the way that countries tried to increase their balance of trade and tried to gain that economic and power advantage. They wanted to reduce the amount of goods imported by imposing tariffs. Remember, tariffs are a tax on imported goods. They want to increase the value of their exports by, making the best goods that they can. So basically, people are forced to buy their stuff, and they want to become self-sufficient. Basically not having to buy things from other countries. So for example, if you need to buy a bunch of lumber, a bunch of wood, maybe it's better that you start a colony in a place that has a lot of trees as opposed to buying it from another country. So this is kind of going to start the race to colonize the whole world. It all kind of starts with money. Economics is really the main thing that's going to drive all of this. So I gave you guys a worksheet to go along with this video. Hopefully you can fill that out, and I will talk to you guys later. We're going to talk more about Spain and Portugal and how really they're the two countries that get this whole kind of mad scramble to colonize the whole world started. So we're going to be talking about the Spaniards and the Portuguese. So join me next time. All right, bye guys.